I'm excited for this.
Welcome. I'm Kirsten.
I'm Sam.
And we're here to chew the metaphysical fat. So, let's get right into it. So we are so privileged today to have one of the most brilliant people I ever see on Twit or anywhere else. A brilliant writer, a real life bard, I must say. And someone who, of course, just like us, doesn't fit in to the normal. So without further ado, I would love to welcome Al Pine to the show. Yay, Al!
Yay!
Yay.
Hello, good evening, ladies. What a very nice intro. And I'm really impressed by your introductory design and music and everything. I'm quite jealous, actually. It's brilliant.
But Gary,
well, thank you. It is brilliant.
So I understand. Yeah, boy, done well. Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah, it really did. Yeah, I cried the first time I saw that intro, and in all honesty, because I was like, "It's so beautiful. I love it." No, okay.
That's great. It really is.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're privileged, aren't we? We're very privileged.
I cut you off, Sam.
No, I was just going to say,
definitely.
I'm really excited today because I've read some of your work, and I've got to say you are a brilliant writer. You really are, and your imagination workshops. You know, you're very inspiring. I think you once gave me a compliment on something that I'd used, and I was just like, "Oh, it's complimented my writing. That's amazing."
No, I like your writing. I think both of you are absolutely fantastic at what you do as well. You know, it's my privilege really to be invited on here. I mean that.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
There was something that I really want to ask you though. So I read your post. I think you put it on one of Pippa Una's posts a long time ago, and it was about kind of this what's it called again? Mandela Effect. Mm-hmm. And you experienced that a long time ago, and I'd really like to get into that because I was absolutely fascinated.
Yeah, sure. But basically, yeah, that was a post which really resonated with people. And the weird thing is, until I actually wrote it and put it on my website, I hadn't really told anyone about it. So it felt a bit strange suddenly coming out with this story, you know, and I half expected people to go, "Oh, how come you never said anything about it before?" But that's all part of the mystique of why it had the impact it had, you see, because it originally goes back to 2003, which is obviously long before I'd ever heard of anything called a Mandela Effect. And I was working for about 6 months out in India. I'd only not that long earlier qualified as a teacher of English as a foreign language, but I'd managed to get a job because obviously they already speak English very well in India, of course. So what I ended up getting was, this was the era where call centers were first being outsourced in large numbers to places like India. And so they were hiring people with experience teaching English abroad to actually, and also who had call center experience, which I did before I was teaching English, to come out and sort of help smooth out the accents, which you know, people were having a little bit of difficulty with, customers were having difficulty with. So there was I. This is me being distracted by the backstory at the moment, which is, this has got nothing to do with the Mandela Effect at the moment. I'm just setting the scene. So there was I in Bangalore teaching these Indian, often highly intelligent postgraduate, highly educated postgraduates who could already speak perfectly good English, but just had an accent which, you know, British customers had, struggled a little bit with. And I was having to nitpick on how they pronounced certain phonemes, even though they were fluent in 3 or 4 different Indian languages as well as English, at least 2 of which had different alphabets, had completely different alphabets as well, and I felt extremely self-conscious to be standing up there and nitpicking over how they pronounce certain words. But on the flip side, I was actually getting paid to show them various cultural British things so they could understand the customers better. So, I was literally watching episodes of EastEnders and Doctor Who with them and things like that, and getting paid for it, which was kind of bizarre. Well, anyway, so one day, as I said, this was 2003, which also happened to be a year of the Cricket World Cup. Now, I'm not really a cricket fan at all. I've never followed cricket, even though I was brought up in England and everything. It's just not my thing. I was more into football, really. And, it didn't really matter to me. But cricket is everything in India. I don't know if you've noticed, but they're not really into any other sport at all, at least not that I'm aware of. They don't really sort of feature in other World Cups much, or even, for a country of their size, even in the Olympic Games, as much as you would expect. So yeah, it's all about cricket, So the point I'm trying to make here is you could not avoid the Cricket World Cup in Bangalore, India, in 2003. It was everywhere. Everyone was talking about it. It was on. If you go for a drink or something to eat, it was on a TV in the corner. It was just everywhere. And the stages progressed. I wasn't paying too much attention, but it came to pass that India reached the semi-finals, and this is where people who know their cricket will immediately spot where the Mandela Effect is, but people who don't wouldn't, because my experience was that they reached the semi-final. And they had to play against Pakistan, who are, of course, their absolute arch rivals. This really accentuates the power of this particular Mandela Effect, because there I was 28 years old, and I was fully grown, and I was having this, immersive experience in India where everyone, all my Indian, there was a few Westerners with me as well, but a lot of Indian colleagues, and they were all terribly excited to be playing Pakistan. And they said to me on a number of occasions before the game, this is the real final. They'd say, well, we don't care about, because they already knew that whoever won would be playing Australia in the final. They said, we don't care about that. This is the real final for us. Anything after that is a bit of a cherry on top. But the real thing that we care about is this showdown with Pakistan. And to that end, because me and the other Western employees were housed in housing which was paid for by the company, and so we invited some of our Indian colleagues around to watch the cricket, to watch this semi-final game. And obviously there was a lot of beers and things as well. We were all young people, sort of watching the sport as you do. And so I wasn't really paying attention to the cricket because I wasn't that interested. I was just chatting to some of my colleagues. I was occasionally, and I was aware that the game was neck and neck, and it really did go to the wire. It went to literally the final over. And to cut a long story short, India won on the final over, literally the last throw of the game. It was that close, according to my memory. And literally, like, as soon as there was a hushed silence, it must have been about 7 or 8 Indians in the room. And they were silent for a second, and then they cheered, and then they said, you've got about 10 seconds to get on the balcony, because there was this balcony which was overlooking half of Bangalore. We were on a slight rise, and we could see a goodly portion. It was a big city, about 6 million people, huge, almost as big as London. It was a big city. And they said, get out on the balcony now, you won't regret it. So, we all dashed out onto the balcony. And sure enough, a count of 5 or 10 seconds, all these fireworks started going off the whole horizon was lit up by fireworks, which they had been anticipating on the chance, all over the city, on the chance that they would win the match, you know. And they weren't celebrating because they got to the final. They were celebrating because they'd beaten their biggest rivals, both in sport and culturally. And you know, and it's really a thing to them because, you know, as you know, there's even been wars between India and Pakistan. There's a lot of needle there. I mean, for many people it's friendly rivalry, I'll say as well, but for many it's not. At least that was the impression I got. And yeah, so anyway, we watched the firework display, and then we all went out night clubbing. You know, so we know a couple of great clubs to go to, you know, come along. And so the Indian colleagues, they you know, commandeered a couple of rickshaws. So me and my Western buddies went out with them on to Bangalore. But I distinctly remember on the way to the centre of Bangalore, where the nightclubs were, one of the Indian lads said, "Hey, why are you taking us the wrong way? You can't, just because we've got Westerners here, you can't fool us. We're locals." You know, he was like, don't be messing around with us here. We know what you're doing. And he was like, no, sir, not like that. He goes, we're just avoiding such and such an area, which is a heavily Pakistan supporting area, because the people of a Muslim persuasion in India often support Pakistan. And so they were like, oh, right, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Actually, that's quite wise. Yeah, carry on. So, you know, they were like, yeah, fine, that's that, you know. But like I said, this was just another one of these minor details. And the fact that I had an entire night of night clubbing after that, and the reason why this was happening was because of this sporting event. And so anyway, I get on with the rest of my life, and I don't think anything else of it. I lose touch with all the people that I worked with at the time, because they were more colleagues than friends, you know, and I lost touch with them within a few months of coming back to England. And I never think about it again, because I never talk about cricket, and I never talk about cricket to anyone who knows anything about cricket, you know what I mean? So it took until 2022. I was working as an English examiner. I was examining, you know, people were doing their tests online in the aftermath of, you know, the whole COVID, you know, pandemic and all that. So I was anyway. That's by the by. So I was conducting an English exam, and as part of the English exam, the topic of cricket came up, and the cricket, you know, and cricket World Cups and things like that. And I just mentioned in passing, oh, I saw that time when it was a young Pakistani man, about student age, you know. And I was just saying, I actually saw when India beat your lot in 2003 in the Cricket World Cup. And he wouldn't have even, or he would have been maybe 1 or 2 years old at the time, you know. But he just frowned straight away and said, well, that never happened. And I was like, what do you mean? What do you mean it never happened? He goes, oh, that never happened. It's like, what do you know? You know, how old were you at the time anyway? And he goes, oh, it doesn't really matter how old I was. As a cricket fanatic, I can tell you the results of every single semi-final game in the entire history of the Cricket World Cup. And I was like, oh, really? It's like, yes, really. India never played Pakistan. They played them in the group stages, but they never played them in the knockout part, and they actually played Kenya, and they did indeed beat Kenya and go on to lose against Australia in the finals that year. And I was like, well, there's just absolutely no way we would have had an evening like that if India had played Kenya. You know what I mean? Absolutely no. It was very disorienting. And then by this time I'd heard of the Mandela Effect, but it was just rattling around in the back of my mind. So I did a bit of more research in it, and then I thought, oh my God, this is my own. Because this was part and probably one of the standout parts of my entire 6-month experience working and living in Bangalore. And it described an entire social event and even interactions leading up to that social event, which apparently can never have happened because they were completely out of context with what did happen. And of course, straight after that exam, I went and Googled it and Wikipedia'd it, because Wikipedia is actually still useful if you want to find out sports. If it's for anything else, it's completely useless. But if you want to find out sports results, it's still quite good. So yeah, and so it was indeed, I could not corroborate that my experience of that Cricket World Cup ever happened in this reality, and so I decided to write about it, and that's what you read.
It was and that's the thing, you know, it was so poignant, because I just think this happens all the time. I really believe that, and we just don't even realize that we're going through our lives, and then just something that it just happened to be such a big event with all that context and all that background, that you were able to really like dig into it and go, no, this definitely happened. I can't doubt myself here. And there was, and then you went away and looked at it. But I bet this happens all the time. You know,
it does.
Sorry, Kirsten. Yeah.
No, it happens all the time, and you know, things happen to me, but they're smaller things, and it's easy to say, well, maybe I just misremembered that. But when it's that, I mean, with all of those different details,
well, of course, there's no doubt that we misremember things, but not of that level of detail and clarity. And and I don't have dreams as long as, you know what I mean. I just don't have. And as far as it fit in too seamlessly with everything else that was going on in my life at the time, you know. And it was, it's just, but it also made me think, when you said, these sort of things happen all the time, that's actually, I have no doubt that that's true. We can't ever really tell how much of it is us genuinely misremembering things, and how much of it is mini Mandela effects. Like I also mentioned in that article which you read, I don't know if you remember it, there was it called to mind a childhood event where I was in the Cub Scouts. I was about 8 years old in the Cub Scouts, and we routinely had to say this prayer. I can't remember the prayer, but I remember that it ended, or part of it was which we will do our best. And then all of a sudden, one child next to me started saying that we will do our best. And then, you know, and I remember it bugging me, but I never really said anything. I thought, it doesn't really matter. You know, it's just, you know, it doesn't, what does it matter? But I just thought it's weird how they just, but then other children started doing it as well. And then I thought, hang on a minute, you know, the other children are starting to get it wrong like that first time. Maybe I should say something about this, but I still didn't. I didn't say anything. And then, like, just a week or two after that, the actual Arcala, the actual Cub Scout leader, started saying it like that as well. And that's when I decided to say something. And the kids were like, what are you on about? It's always been that, you know.
Can I just ask you that, actually? Because that's really, that is interesting. That just, the reason is, it was one person, but was other people still saying...
Yeah, it started off with just one person saying it, not the way that I had been accustomed to saying it. Which the implications of that are interesting as well, aren't they? Because it could be that, you know, we fall by proximity, or we fall one by one into parallel time, or that our frequencies actually affect those around us in a similar way.
It's like this entrainment idea, isn't it? Like we're entraining people into the same reality as us. But you've still got this, you've still clearly got this remembrance of it being a certain way. But yeah, that is really fascinating how different people. I mean, the first Mandela Effect, I actually remember proper Mandela Effect, Nelson Mandela. I remember he went into prison and he died. I'm pretty sure that's what happened to him. I mean, I was very young.
Just because I'm from the other place where he didn't die. But I mentioned in the thing that the first I'd ever heard of the Mandela Effect was, you know, just finding out, well, why they called it that. And then I was apparently in the early days of the internet, it had been rattling around in my mind for many years before I had a personal interest in it. But I do remember in the early days of the internet, early-ish days of the internet, maybe finding out that there were people like yourself who remember him dying in prison. And I was like, well, that's definitely not me, because I distinctly remember the day when he was released from prison, because it was also, I was nearly 16 at the time. And it was also, it happened to be the day that Mike Tyson lost his first ever boxing match. And I distinctly remember writing in my diary that evening, 2 things that I thought would never happen happened. on the same day, you know. And it was also just a couple of months after the Berlin Wall fell. So I remember, you know, I was old enough by then to be starting to take an interest in that political one. I thought, well, you know,
That's also interesting though, that all those things have happened together, you know, because I think they get these kind of like clump events, you know. This is the thing, it's like some sort of momentum. I can't quite put it into words, actually. I need to go away and think about this, but that made me think these really big significant events that kind of impact reality, you think, is it all kind of linked in? Is this what's kind of shifting it? Because I remember Nelson Mandela dying in prison, and I remember watching on the news, and then I remember, because my mum always had the bloody news on, and then I remember learning about it in school, going, oh, Nelson Mandela died and blah blah blah, and then I remember him being released, and I was like, I thought he died. I distinctly remember going, he's dead. You know, I was only a kid, but I was like, no, he's definitely dead. We learned about him in the school. Oh, don't be silly, Sam. Don't be silly. He didn't die. And loads of kids, they thought I'd had some sort of aneurysm or something.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
It's really fascinating. And, you know, so I have my little story about the Mandela Effect. When I first heard about the Mandela Effect, I said, people just don't remember things. I'm sure that's all it is. But I have to tell you, when I was a child, I really wanted to travel to Australia. And I had a globe, and I used to look at the globe all the time. I mean, you know, I sat there looking at the globe. These are the places I want to travel. And I distinctly remember that Australia was way down, away from everything else, and it was shaped differently. And I didn't believe in the Mandela Effect until I saw this thing of people saying, well, the continents have changed shape and moved. And I was like, no, I know what the continents look like. And I got the book out. I got a book out, a book of maps, and I was like, Australia has completely changed. It's up higher. It's got those little horns on it. It didn't used to have that. And so then I was like, well, maybe they've just started remapping it. I actually had the book that I had when I was a child that I used to look at maps in, and it's like that in that book too. And that just flipped me out, and I started running around. I literally, it's
very disorientating, isn't it?
Yeah,
it really is. It was, and I do remember that distinctly because I looked at it so much. So it's kind of similar to what happened to you with the cricket game, in that there's too much there to just blow it off and say, oh, I must have just, but yeah, so I think we've all had those moments, and it is really interesting, Sam. I'm trying to feel what you were saying about that momentum. And
yeah, I need to go away and think about that. You know, it's like when you get these little psychic light bulbs going off in your head, and then you've got to like kind of like fizzle in. Because I think we're all a bit psychic.
Yeah, there's some serious implications to that, isn't there? Which I think I could probably also explore a little bit with regard to my intention to raise the altitude of people's thoughts. You know, and one of the things that, for lack of a better term, triggers me is when I see, you know, all these doom posters on Twitter, and you know, I know often they're coming from a good place and they mean well, but I think they're doing more harm than good, really. Because, you know, they see, you know, that it's like the future is only mapped out according to the parameters of certain possibilities which their imaginations tell them can actually be rendered.
Yeah.
You know? And
that's the thing, isn't it? Imagination is creation, and people forget that.
Stretch that fucker, you know.
And that's the thing. Like, if you're literally going to expand yourself and you say, oh, this is all there is in front of us. We talk about this with Sammy and Kirsten. So we've had some crazy experiences a lot recently, haven't we? And what we've kind of come to the realization is, the more you expand your bandwidth and your ability to think outside of the box, the more you will start to perceive a larger range of what reality actually is. And that's just because our minds aren't kind of going back to the default setting in a sense. They were able to look past the boxes and the barriers that are put in place. And I think sometimes when things kind of happen, your mind just snaps back So you might see a UFO really quickly flash through the air. But if somebody hasn't started to expand their mind, they just switch off because they just can't accept it as reality. Sorry,
there's even documented precedents for that in the days when what do you call it, when the conquistadors were first actually starting to harbor themselves in the Americas, and they literally, their ships couldn't be seen. Because the people, if they came off the ship, they could be seen because they can recognize the outline of human beings, even if they looked a bit different to them and dressed a bit different to them. But the actual ships, they had no reference point for them. And so
I had read about that too. So amazing. And it really does show that you often can't see something you don't expect to see. And Al, one of the things I love your posts about the gloom and doom stuff, because I fully agree with that. And, you know, I see so many people going, this is what they have planned. They're going to do this.
This is what they are going to do to us. We're just going to bend over and take it.
Yeah. It's like, no, we're not.
I just write script rejected. If I can be asked writing anything at all, I just write script rejected underneath, as if I've been sent a script by a very mediocre writer, and I'm maybe a literary agent or a publisher, and I'm just like, I have it in my mind's eye that I'm just, there's a little imagination exercise for you. I have in my mind's eye that I've received this Armageddon-like apocalyptic script, and I'm just tossing it with all the contempt I can muster into a waste paper basket in the corner of the room and thinking, script rejected.
Oh no, do you know what you need? A big one of those stampers, a big red stamper. Rejected, like with like proper gusto. Yeah.
I don't even dignify it with that much energy or ink.
Oh, I don't know. I like a good stamping.
Fair enough. Each to their own.
I love
it. It's pretty behind it, isn't it? Go on, sorry, Kirsten.
Yeah, I'm doing that because, well, and you know, you try to tell people you're helping them create it when you say, "Oh, this is what's going to happen," and you post it all over Twitter or whatever, and it's like, why are you helping these people create the reality that they want to create when it obviously isn't the one that we want? And you know, you're saying you don't want it, and yet you're putting all this energy into it. So yeah.
So right. So I sometimes use my imagination workshop exercises on myself. It's like, right, okay, so let's raise the altitude of this thought. This bugs the hell out of me, right? So what's a more empowering spin I could put on this, you know, because I'm not going to convince these people. I'm not really inclined to convince people who really want it, but maybe they want or need to render a doom scenario. Maybe that is part of their growth curve, you know. And so I was thinking how, you know, how we like to think of ourselves as spiritually expanding, and then you know, eventually we will become one with the prime entelechy, the great cosmic all, whatever you want to call it. Well, that may well be the case for those of us who are heading in that direction, but maybe we need to spare a thought for people who have already been to the top of the mountain, and where is there to go once you've been at the top? Then down, you know. So there's got to be a certain number of souls who are on the way down, and they don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear all this everything's going to be all right shit. No, they don't want to hear that at all. They want to actually experience, and obviously that, I'm not saying they necessarily think this in a conscious way. This is just their soul path. Their soul path is to experience the very visceral sense of dissolution of all, you know, unto nothingness, and then have the pleasure of turning around and coming back up the hill again, you know. So
well, that's the thing, isn't it? We're all spiring down or spiring up. We're all at different levels, and that's the thing. You can't really judge another person's journey because you don't understand the greater aspects of it. And that's,
I don't even disagree with them. It's fine. It's just we're meeting each other like on the way up and on the way down. That's all. Passing. And yeah, to them, what I'm saying is a load of bollocks, and to me, what they're saying is a load of bollocks too. So fine.
That's why we're on different timelines. So it's all good, isn't it?
That's right. That's right.
But no, you make a very good point about what we experience. I think is beneficial to the soul, because this is the thing, isn't it? We're all here to learn something different, and no two journeys are the same. And I think that's the really beautiful thing about humanity and the whole experience that we're actually having, that it's this multicolored, multicultural kind of smorgasbord of things that are going on, you know, and it's lovely. It's lovely to see and appreciate. And I think that's kind of where the humility and the humanity comes in, you know, when we can say that I don't agree with what you're saying, but actually I appreciate you on your journey, but I'm just not going to go there. But yeah, I know what you're saying about kind of the doom and gloom, because you don't also want to get dragged into that, do you, either?
It's quite seductive. You know, it's like the sirens of yore, isn't it? You know, they'll sing you onto the rocks, you know, with these tales, because there's something seductive about disempowerment. There's something seductive about outsourcing your own personal autonomy to forces which you know, like, are more powerful. And you can do a Pontius Pilate then, can't you? You can wash your hands and say, well, there's nothing I can do about it, you know.
It's just, not my responsibility.
Carried along on the waves of fortune, you know.
Exactly. Yes. It's you can wash your hands of, you can absolve yourself of the responsibility of having to.
Especially once you see how muscular, you know, you see how muscular the evil is, and you know, they've got all the bases covered, and they've got all the judiciary, and they've got this, and they've got the army, and they've got all the money, and all this sort of stuff. And all of this is true, but it doesn't actually say anything about the phenomenon of being coming from non-being. That which is not begets that which is. So, you know, it's an inevitability. You know, you can. Anyway, I can't really be too sidetracked with that, but I wrote there's another thing on my website called Divine Emergence and Why So Many People Mistake It for Hopium. And that's another one of my articles on my website. And it kind of goes into all that.
I really need to go check your website out, actually, because you sound like you've got some amazing stuff on there. I'd really like to dig into these imagination workshops and just tell us a bit more about how they kind of came about and what the purpose of them are.
Well, the purpose of them is to. I just seem to be. We sort of touched on it earlier when we were trying to say how people need a wider sense of what's possible in order to be able to render a favourable outcome, especially after the constant onslaught of disempowering propaganda we've all been fed all our lives. So I just thought, and see, the thing is, it's not that I have any answers or anything like that. I just see the way I see it is like this. Imagine we're all in this eternal now, and we all know the future is like a big cone which expands away from us, a possibility. The further in the future you go, the more expanded possibilities are. But I also think the past is like that as well, because there is no past and there is no future. So that's why all these people arguing about, oh well, you know, the pyramids are built by this, or the pyramids, or there was an ancient civilization here. I know it wasn't, it was, you know, Lemuria. It wasn't Atlantis. No, it was Atlantis. Not all these people. There was giants in those days. No, there wasn't. All this kind of business. They can all be right, because what they are doing is they're rendering the past according to. There's only so much hard evidence that you can actually hold in your hands, and the rest of it is interpretation. And history is the propaganda of the past anyway, really. So there's that. But anyway, I'm digressing again. The imagination workshops, the idea is to just for us to work together and learn how we can mutually expand our senses of the possible, so that we don't get trapped in the narratives that are being sold to us, not least by TV programs like The Handmaid's Tale, for example, or things like that, you know, because I mean, I invite you to just look on Netflix, look at any science fiction program that's on Netflix. Dystopia, dystopian, 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 dystopian.
Yeah.
There is no non-dystopian vision for the future which is being given any kind of fresh air. on mainstream media channels, and there hasn't been for decades, I would argue. Or if there has, it's not really not being given much shrift at all, and I'm not aware of it. So,
Well,
you know,
do you think this is because, like you were saying, like with the opium, like the addiction to experiencing other things, to experiencing like this doom and gloom? I would argue that I think I'm saying they, like as a general consensus state for the population, watch TV as a form of escapism.
Yeah.
So they don't actually see it as though it's something that's unfolding, that they're being programmed into them. They just see it as a form of escape, like, oh, we're going to experience this other reality or this other state of being or whatever, to take us out of our mundane lives. And they're not consciously aware that everything that they consume is programming their reality.
Well, it's a classic bait and switch, isn't it? It wasn't like that in the old days. There did used to be utopian visions of the future. Just look at the earlier Star Treks. You know, there did used to another thing. There did used to be, there did used to be more balanced news, and there did used to be people in positions of power and influence who actually had an appreciation for our ancestors and what they believed, instead of wanting, and they didn't want to desecrate Western culture all the time. And it's just that this has been taken away from us, in my opinion, in a kind of psychological warfare and demoralization tactic to take away all what was good. And you know what, once we get used to, we've had a few decades of sitting in front of the TV after a hard day's work, and watching soap operas or watching sci-fis which depicted like a sort of a more utopian future or a more idealistic future. And then all of a sudden, before you know it, just a little totalitarian tiptoe. It's just, they just drip. Or there's, it starts to be 55% dystopian, and then it starts, and now it's total dystopian. But in the meantime, by this time, we've had all the hope leached out of us as we sit in front of our chairs after a hard day's work. Well,
that's the thing, isn't it? It's never like all of these things with the NWO. It's been decades long in the making, and it's never, these kind of wars, these psychological warfares, they're never won by a landslide, because there'd be too much of an uproar. They're run by a tiptoe, one in front of the other, aren't they? That's the thing.
Only now they are rather interesting, being rather clumsy, aren't they? Rather clumsy indeed. Funny that.
Well, I think they've got a bit of pressure.
Yes. Well,
and that's the problem when you put the thumb screws on, You want to say, my love?
Even the lighting in the newer movies, the new videos, which I don't even watch any of that stuff anymore, because I don't want to escape to dystopia. It's like, but even the lighting has become muted. The colors are not as bright. It looks really dark in most of those movies. I went to see, what was it? Downton Abbey quite a few years ago now, when the new Downton Abbey movie came out. Yeah, I was like, I want to go see the movie. The lighting alone just completely, it was like, why is this so dark? Why is it so dark here? Why are the colors so muted? I mean, it's all of these little things that they do, and they keep taking it deeper and deeper and deeper into that dark.
I think many of them aren't even aware of it. It's just if you like, the people who are responsible for giving creatives their big break have probably, by and by, become used to favouring the dystopian narrative, and might even have convinced themselves that that's what people want.
They have, and I will tell you, I was in a university writing program here in the U.S., and this has been back in the I was around 2000, and they literally told me that my language was too elevated. It wasn't supposed to be pretty and rhyme anymore. That's not, because that's, don't even get me started on what's his name, Ezra Pound, but it's not supposed to be pretty anymore. And they said that I was working on this novel, which I'm still working on now, and they said, it's too optimistic, and that's not realistic. We want it to be real. We want to be realistic. And I'm going, well, I don't read books to be real. I read books to have my imagination inspired and to see things.
Exactly, and that's why, hence the imagination workshops. Basically, we're going to have to, if you want a job done properly, you've got to do it yourself, don't you? We're not going to get empowering narratives for the individual from the usual suspects. We're going to have to do it ourselves.
It's true.
But that's the thing as well. It breeds that, though, doesn't it? Sorry, go on,
publish the way that you would if you wrote something dystopian, and you're not going to get, because they're going to say this is not real enough. And apparently real means it's really depressing and horrible.
Well, because of course that's the agenda. That's the agenda, isn't it? Happy, well-adjusted, confident, non-traumatized human beings are spiritual mofos who are very, very difficult to control. They don't want people like that, running around the world, sort of.
That's right.
Laying down their boundaries and shit,
Yeah, that's right.
But the thing is, that's to adversity. There's that thing, isn't there? What is it? Hard times make great men. Great men make great times. I can't remember. You'll probably know what I'm on about. You know what I mean?
Hard times create great men. Great men create good times. Good times create weak men. Weak men create hard times, and then hard times.
But I feel like we're on the cycle now, aren't we? That's the thing. Because we've had things made so easy, it just kind of seems like people in society are just really weak. Maybe that's just me being.
That's true, but I think it's been given a hefty push as well. It's like, I don't think this cycle would be. I think it would take longer I suspect it would take longer for the rot to set in if it wasn't for, a few devil's whispers in the ears of the place, corridors of power and things. It's like, no, we want to take that off the table. Let's turn up the dial on the dystopian TV programming. Just a few little things like, take pop music, for example. I was well into. I used to be a college radio DJ. I wasn't a very good one, but I used to absolutely love music growing up, and I knew a lot about it as it was. And for me, it's been a very traumatizing and depressing experience just to see how degenerate things have got. Over the years, if like, for instance, I even said it started before my time. If you want to go back to the 60s, you've got things like, I walked her home and she held my hand, and it wouldn't be such a one night stand. And then 40 years later, you've got my neck, my back, lick my you know what, and my you know what. So and that kind of happened in my lifetime, pretty much. And
I did not expect that to come out of your mouth.
Yeah, well, I was. Yeah, if we were down the pub, it would have.
Oh my God, that is a shame that we were not at the pub. This would be hilarious.
Another time, perhaps.
Maybe on a different timeline, we can all converge. No, I do agree. I mean, even when people were being crass, they were being crass in a nice way.
Yeah, don't get me right. I'm not, I'm not averse to being crass. But the thing is, it's the way it was just being fed to the youth. It's like, this is what's cool now, all right? I've got to say, I mean, even stuff went out of the window.
Well, the thing with hip hop, it's been documented quite widely that it was a CIA psyop to.
I'm old enough to remember that when hip hop was wholesome, and you got Soul to Soul singing, what's the meaning of life, elevate your mind, free your soul. you know, in the late 80s and even before that, you know, they had a very anti-drugs message and things. And it just, again, it's just like we were talking about with dystopias on TV. They start off wholesome. It's a bait and switch. It's an old trick. They start off with something wholesome, and then they just rot it from the inside out.
Yes.
I mean,
and
how long has that been going on with Parliament? That's what I want to know now.
With what?
You what?
Parliament.
With Parliament.
What, was it ever wholesome?
It's a good question. Yeah. There's probably a few wholesome people who went in it with good intentions, and then they either got corrupted or bunked off. I think that's the thing. It's like, if they can't corrupt you, you may remember, or it might be a bit before your time, that the Labour leader before Tony Blair, in fact the one who conveniently made room for Tony Blair, was a rather popular guy called John Smith, who suddenly dropped down dead of a heart attack at 55, and then Tony Blair was the guy who ended up taking the Labour Party to their long-serving government.
They did. I mean, the thing is with Tony Blair, I mean, we've touched on this before we came on air, didn't we? But we were as a nation, we were kind of fed up. We were depressed, and then Tony Blair came along, and yeah, you'll probably remember that.
He was pretty young as well. He was only in his early 40s, and he was shrewd enough to actually make friends with the youth culture icons of the time. You know, people like Noel Gallagher and things were seen in 10 Downing Street, you know, sort of, and I think he'd live to regret it, don't get me wrong, but, you know, what he said, we were all, a lot of us were taken in by, you know.
Well, he had Alistair Crowley as well.
Yeah, that's a very good Freudian, Alistair Campbell. Yeah, that's a
Alistair Campbell. I don't know why I said Alistair Campbell, but it was the equivalent though, wasn't he?
And
yeah, he was a magical spin doctor.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if he was still doing the things like Alistair Crowley did. I don't know if he was putting things at people's bumholes and stuff. We'll not even go there. But it was definitely.
I have absolutely no idea, but it wouldn't shock me.
Yeah, he was weaving a different kind of magic. We'll just put it that way. Yeah. So I think that it all kind of went hand in hand, and it kind of going like circling back to this how a nation is corrupted. I think a good way is to say it, like, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
My favourite saying, my absolute favourite saying. If nothing else, you know, I would advocate that people need to. I would humbly suggest that people need to deeply contemplate that expression, because it's so true. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. I mean, I've had my moments as well. It's like, well, if I ruled the world, I'd do this and I'd do that, you know.
But again, you know, it comes down to the human nature and our, you know, need to control things. I mean, even down to the fact, like, when you're daydreaming, I often think, oh, if I won the lottery, I'd do this for this person and this for this person and this for this person. And actually what I'm doing is I'm controlling their life. Because when you really dig deep into the desire to do that behind them, that person hasn't come up to me and said, Sam, you've won the lottery. Can you help me by doing this? It's my need to take that, you know, their experience away from them and give them this kind of like dummy, you know?
And if I tell you what, if everyone thought like you did, we wouldn't have to worry about communism. We really wouldn't.
That's true. Well, and communism is the ultimate best example of the road to hell being paved with good intentions.
Yeah,
and
I would say so,
I mean, because when you look back at 2020, everybody had good intentions. Well, not everybody, but the general populace had good intentions. But they took that intention and they twisted it and said, "This is how," and they used it to control people.
This is why I don't like it when people say, "Oh, the human race is terrible. Oh, why can't we be more like animals and everything?" You know, it's like, well, hang on a minute. The very fact that it is possible to manipulate human beings in the way they have been manipulated is because they are innately good. You know, I mean, it's like, don't get me wrong, it's like on the sort of everyday level. You know, 90% of the people you meet are relatively okay. You know, they range from being, you know, relatively okay to being decent people. Obviously, if you're walking in the corridors of power, it goes more like 90-10 the other way. You know, I suspect.
Yes.
Not that I've ever done that, but that's just what I
I
suspect.
don't think they're real people, though.
Well,
Yeah, I don't think a lot of
it's open to debate. It really is.
Which brings us to that post you made was about bait and switch, Al, where you talked about, I just saw that today.
Oh, it's just today, yes.
They're gradually replacing the politicians with, it was brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You see, the thing is, it's not all these tricks are not the idea that only the bad guys use subterfuge and cheating and things like that. I think it would only be true if you look at the absolute extremes. We're dealing with human beings and true souls here, and you know, if you've integrated the shadow, or if you've at least you know, sort of introduced yourself to it and named it and shone a light into that darkness, you know, you can have a degree, you can exercise a degree of control over the dark arts, you know, without it consuming you. But you have to be very conscious of what you're doing, and the upshot of that is, the way to actually, if you like, there's an eternal dance between light and dark. It's another a very short article I wrote called, what's it called again? Hang on a sec. It's called The Devil as Spiritual Consultant. The idea that once you ascend and you know, you stop being so polemic about things, right? It's like, this is good, this is bad, must have all good, can't have any bad. Then it starts to be like a dance with the negative impulse, because it does take two to tango. And you know, if you collapse the duality and go into one day, we will collapse the duality and we'll all ascend into loftier aims. But while there's music and laughter and love and romance, let's face the music and dance, as they say. So yeah, you are going to have to mix it with the dark actors if you want to be in any way effective. And so the way to actually do that is to use their tricks as well. And like I said in that little recording today, they're so used to being the ones who play these tricks, and they're looking outwards as well. They're not looking in because they don't like what they see in there. So they don't turn within, they don't look within, they're always looking without. Meanwhile, on the inside, they have unrecognized good aspects, just like we have unrecognized bad aspects that we don't want to go into. They have this divine emergence growing within them, and they don't even, and so they can't even see it when it's there, when it's actually manipulating them. You know, light comes out of the void, and that is something that people often overlook.
Well, that is the thing, isn't it? Like we're in the dualistic world, aren't we? That's the point. And I just think we've got to a point now where the polarities are so kind of at the opposite ends that we've got this massive contrast. But like you said, just to kind of surmise that, you can have good or bad that will come out of any situation. There's always going to be a plethora of outcomes and reasons, and you know, I forgot the word now, but whatever. So there's always going to be lots of stuff that's going to come out of the same situation. It's just it isn't black and white, is what I'm trying to say. Even though we're in polarity, I always liken polarity to just being like one side, you know, good is one side and bad is one side of the same stick, and there's all the shades in the middle. Yeah, but we need all that to have the experience that we're having now.
That's what exactly. I like to call that digitized thinking, and I don't think it's any accident that everything has been digitized. You know, our TVs have become digitized. We want to we're encouraged to think in binary and digitized terms, but reality is actually analog. It's not digital, it's analog. Reality is nuance.
Exactly. Art is nuance, and life is art, isn't it? And that's the thing. And just like
Yes,
art, like, it's the interpretation of it, isn't it? It's individual.
it is.
Sorry, Kirsten, go on.
It is. And everything in duality is going to have both sides. So something that is at first seen as a tragedy might actually have a lot of good outcomes, and vice versa. So yeah, exactly.
Kind of going off topic, because I really want to ask you about this. You mentioned once you wrote an article about meeting some very special individuals in a pub. So I'd really love to hear about that.
Yes, that's the other. I'd say that's the other major, highly unusual thing that happened in my life. That the other really standout one, at least that I want to sort of publicly talk about, and that was basically from the time when I was probably at my least spiritual, and I was probably at my most just normie, really. I was about 22 and I was living in Bradford at the time, and it was Christmas. It was the first Christmas that I'd spent away from my family, and so I was kind of, I was sharing a house with a few friends, but they'd all gone home for Christmas, so I was literally there on my own, a bit bored. So I decided to go to the pub, and so I went to this quiet little pub in Bradford. And there was only two other guys there, apart from the barman. There was like this trucker guy who was here on my left-hand side, and sitting a little bit further down the bar, there was this black guy who was just keeping himself to himself, And so I was just chatting for a while with this trucker, and we were chatting fine at first, but then by and by he started getting a little bit belligerent or a little bit drunk, and he started seeing or hearing things that weren't there and stuff that I was saying, and started taking offense at things and getting a little bit aggro. And at this point, the guy at the other end of the bar just said something. I can't quite recall what. He just said something like, "Oh no, I recognize the town this guy says he's from. He's just a young lad having a drink. Just don't want." And the guy calmed down immediately. But anyway, so obviously, because I went and talked to this other guy then, and this is where my memory starts to fail me, because I only remember, I probably talked to him for 2 or 3 hours, but I only remember about 1 or 2 minutes. And the bit that I remember, the conversation had got around to, "Oh, all right, so what do you?" "Oh, I've just finished university, blah, blah, blah." "All right, so what do you do?" And he said, he sounded a little bit bashful at first. He said, "Yeah, well, I don't think you'd understand." He said, I don't think you'd really kind of understand if I told you." So, and I said, "Oh, try me, And he said, "Well, all right then, you asked for it." He said something like, "I am tasked with monitoring the conscious evolution of the galaxy," or something like that. And remember, this was before the internet had barely. It's 1990. The internet was just something that no one really had it yet. Certainly hadn't. I wasn't going to be on the internet for a few years yet. So I didn't know anything about this world at all. I mean, I was a bit of a sci-fi and fantasy fan, which is why I was and I was like, "Oh, really? Okay." And I said rather playfully, I said, "Oh, maybe I'm one of those as well." Hello, you there? You still there? Oh yeah, Kirsten's still there. I said, "Well, maybe I'm one of those as well." And then he to that he just grinned, this enormous toothy grin, and looked down and said, "I wouldn't be at all surprised," which I thought was a very strange response. But anyway, I'm pretty sure we talked for quite a lot of time after that, but I just don't remember the conversation. And I would have forgotten the encounter. There wasn't anything that unusual apart from his answer. There wasn't anything that unusual about that encounter. The unusual bit came about 4 months later, when I was still living in Bradford, and I was out in those days. I'd only just finished uni. I was out on the lash quite a lot, and I was out on the lash with my friends in Bradford, and they'd just gone to the bar to get some drinks, and I was waiting at the table. And I even remember the name of the bar. It was a place called the Blob Shop, which doesn't exist anymore in Bradford, but it did at once upon a time. And so anyway, while I was waiting for my friends, I noticed that there was two other guys sitting opposite me at the table. And I recognized one of the guys straight away as the guy I'd spoken to months earlier in that pub. Only this time he was with like another gentleman who was about, it looked like he could have even been his dad. He was like about 20 years old, another black guy. But this time they were both dressed in this kind of very incongruous for 1997 Bradford, a very incongruous kind of African tribal costume. And I was very and he's like, oh yeah, I remember you. He goes, and the older ones like leaned forward and he said, what are you doing? And I said, well, just out and having a drink with my friends. And he said, no, really, what are you doing? And it's sort of, I just fell silent then. And then the weird thing was they both reached out and they put their hands over mine, which is, again, not something you'd socially do. And especially, you're self-conscious, your friends are here, these complete strangers who don't look like they're from around here, and they're also wearing really unusual clothes. They put their hand on you, and they said, go home, cook yourself some nice food, and get a good night's sleep. And I was at this point, because they were putting their hands over mine, and and making me feel very self-conscious. I went and looked over to my friends to see if they could see what was going on, and I could barely see them because it was like the environment beyond a certain point, maybe a couple of arms lengths away, was very blurry. It was like I was stuck in this kind of blurry boundary, and I could just about see them. But anyway, after they said, go home, cook yourself some nice wholesome food from scratch, and go and get a good night's sleep. And then I looked to my friend, and then when I turned round, they'd gone, and my friends came back with the drinks. And I said to them, did you just see that? And they said, well, see what? And I said, well, those two guys sat here in like really weird clothes. Didn't you see me talking to them just then? And they said, no, we didn't see anything. So there's that. And after that, interestingly enough, just a few weeks after that, I got a job, a job in the local Dillon's bookshop in Bradford, co-running the Mind, Body and Spirit section, where I had the liberty to read up on a lot of esoteric works during quieter moments. And I think that was probably the beginning of my awakening phase, shall we say. Was literally in the wake of that.
Yeah, and
that is so
Go on, Kirsten.
awesome. Yeah. I
still don't know what it was all about. I just don't know what it was all about. Did you go home?
Did you actually go home?
I did. Yeah, I did. I said, well, I'm not really feeling it tonight, lads. And I went home, and I cooked myself some nice food, and I applied. I applied for some work, and I got that job in the bookshop. And my life changed quite a lot after that, quite quickly. And I moved away from Bradford down to Bristol, and
yeah. I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? You've had similar experiences, haven't you, Kirsten?
Yes, I have had similar experiences, and I feel like around that time, and I've had a couple of interesting experiences. I had a sort of a man in black come to me in the late 90s. And then in 2004, I had these people just walk into the yoga studio where I was working. And I was like, can I help you? And they said, no, we're here to help you. And they were very tall. I mean, they did look unusual. They were very tall and very nice looking. And they had these radiant smiles. And they did energy work on me. And they talked to me about a lot of things. And I met with them over a few months. But I really do feel like, and there's a time when I would have thought this was really egoic and not a thing to say, but I really do feel like people like us are monitored by somebody else that is sort of watching our progress and trying to help steer where this world is going. And, you know, because there's been, you know, most of my life I've been like, I'm not special enough for that. You know, I'm just a normal person. I'm not special enough for that to be. But I'm actually realizing that our perspectives, the people that I'm finally connecting with over the twit, our perspectives.
Or maybe it's not about being special necessarily. It's just about where you're at in the journey of, you know, of evolving your consciousness. You know, I mean, it could well be that all of us go through a phase where these sort of things start happening more and more. You know, it's just where you are along the road. You know, some people are in a different part of the road. You know.
I agree, and I have really come to see that because I think it's just because as we become more conscious, we really do steer the creation a lot more than people who are at a different place in the road and aren't really conscious of how they're using their intentions and their creative energy. So it would make sense that as people, whoever they are, become more conscious, and that they would be more monitored and more like, you know, I love it. You know, the thing I love most about that story, Al, is what are you doing?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I totally. Yeah, and I didn't understand the context of it straight away. It's like, they didn't bother. Except no, they're like, no, what are you doing? They just emphasized it more. Yeah. And when I got it,
yeah,
I'm doing what? Just get it. You know, I'm doing any 23-year-old. You know. What do you mean? I think it was more like, okay, enough already. You've had your phase now.
Yeah, stop drinking. Come on now, chop chop.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing I think what Kirsten was trying to say was, I think there's people that have come here for a specific reason, and we're all here for a reason. I'll grant you, but I think we've come here because we talk about this a lot. And I really believe that we are going through a massive shift at the moment. And we're on the precipice of that now, you know, it's precipice. And we've all come for this kind of, we've come to be the ground crew essentially, and we've got support. And not all of our support is necessarily incarnated here, fully. And I think this is what's happening. And on the flip side of that, I also think that we're monitored because there's not just the good, we'll call them good. There's not just the people on one side that know we're here. There's the people on the other side as well. And what Kirsten and I are actually finding, we've done this podcast and we're becoming more visible, is that we've had a lot more help from both sides, haven't we, Kirsten? Help from one side and more interference from the other, we'll say. Kirsten.
Oh, have we lost Kirsten?
Oh. She just looked like she was watching me so peacefully and intently. Like she was like, "Yes, Sam, I'm really interested in what you're saying." Yeah.
Remember the question, because I want to hear the answer to that too. But anyway, well, what would your answer be?
About
what you just asked Kirsten.
Oh, about, you know, do we think we're here because we're being monitored?
Well, yeah, it was, and I think it was also about some of the unusual experiences that either here she is, she's back now.
Some of the sorry, I'm sorry, Al, I'm trying to do my dog is a puppy, and she's a princess, so I'm trying to manage the puppy while I do this, and I can't leave because if not she cries, and I can't.
Oh, bless.
Yeah. No, we were just talking about Kirsten. It's gone. It's completely gone.
Whether we're being monitored or not. I'm sorry, my internet just suddenly decided to quit, and I just.
But that's so funny, isn't it? That it happens, right?
Happens to the best of us.
Yeah.
Kirsten had a nice visit recently from somebody, didn't you? Oh, we're not talking about that on them.
I don't know which one are you talking about? I don't know. Oh, what? I don't know.
Anyway, let's go on. Sorry.
Are you talking about the guy?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. My internet doesn't work much better, honestly, but
Yeah, I think we
well,
were just
yeah,
talking about like the
I don't.
interesting experiences that we've had as well, and like the people that have kind of come into our lives. So you were talking about
Yeah.
a talent tree, weren't you, and how they came and give you energy work and kind of guided you.
Yes. And I had never heard of any of those things at the time. I mean, I didn't know, they said, oh, we sent all these indigos down here and people got lost because we didn't realize how hard it was down here. And I had no idea I had never heard of an indigo. I had never
Yeah.
heard of, and they talked to me about vibrational frequency and all of this stuff. And I had never heard of any of that. It was completely new to me. And I also had an experience where this was probably 1997. I had a poetry group and we would meet once.
That was the year that happened to me, 1997. Sorry.
Isn't that interesting? So we had this poetry group and this guy came to the poetry group and he was really tall and he was dressed in black and he had this black beret and he had mirrored glasses. I never saw this man's eyes. And his skin was like really loose and pale. And he came and he introduced himself to all the women and he kissed our hands, which was really odd. At that time, it's like
in a good way or in a creepy way.
Well, it was just weird. I mean, it wasn't that creepy. I didn't find it creepy. I just thought it was weird that he was kissing. He'd shake when he shook hands with women, he would kiss their hands, and it was like it's very odd. But anyway, I ended up. He asked me to go out to lunch with him one day, and I went because he asked me if he could do my numerology, and I said, "Oh, sure," And he came to lunch with this stack of old computer paper stack. It's like this thick, and he
was it like the old computer paper with the holes on either side where you just
with the holes on it? Yes, that. And he says, I've never seen this before, and I just need to tell you, you're a light messenger. And I was like, oh. And, it was funny because when he said it, I was like, oh, well, yeah, of course. Even though consciously that wasn't anything that I had ever.
That is similar, isn't it? That's like me saying, oh, maybe I'm one of those too. And the guy goes, oh, I wouldn't be at all surprised.
Yeah. And I wouldn't be, Al. I wouldn't be at all surprised. But I was like, and then he says to me, well, I'm going to be leaving, and I just wanted to leave this with you and let you know that you're a light messenger. And I said, oh, where are you going? And he said, well, I can't say. And he said, the CIA would really love to know where I am. And at that point I was like, wow. Oh, lunatic. Okay. Because, at that point in my life, now if somebody said that to me, I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm not surprised. But it's like, so that was at the time I was just like, what is he on about? But in retrospect, when I look back at that, it's much more interesting. At the time, I just thought, well, he was really weird, but he did give me a really interesting numerology report. So
that's a cool experience.
Yeah. But it's interesting when those things happen to you. Sometimes it doesn't seem weird. Like when those people came to me at the yoga studio, it didn't seem weird until I thought about it later. At the time, it seemed pretty normal. Of course, I didn't have the experience of being sort of separated from my friends, although I will say I met them one time at this food court in this mall, and it was completely deserted except this janitor who never looked at us. And I thought it was really odd that there was nobody there except somebody who didn't even ever look at us or acknowledge that we were sitting there. And now looking back at that, I mean, I didn't think it was odd at the time, but when after the experience, I was like, that was kind of weird.
I got the impression with when my friends were at that bar, I got the impression that whole encounter happened in just a split second. It was like it was just taken out of phase with normal time or something, which kind of explained the blurriness. I couldn't see very clearly beyond a certain point, and You know, yeah. And again, I got the impression that there was more to the second encounter as well, that we actually had. It wasn't just them telling me to go home, that there was more, but my memory just all I was left with was again an impression that it had been a longer conversation, but that I couldn't access it. I've often thought about maybe getting some, you know, hypno-regression or something to access that, but I've never really had I have to be someone I really trust as well. So
yeah, that it is really fascinating, and I'm sure there was. And, you know, I've had similar things where I couldn't remember things, and I've asked my guides, you know, can you help me remember this? And they say, you don't need to know that right now. That's why you don't remember it. So maybe,
yeah, that could be it. But again, it's like, I remember thinking that at the time, but it's been nearly 30 years now. And it's like, when will I be ready? Excuse me, you know, you can't just beam into my early 20s like that or whatever. And give me these experiences and then just sod off and never actually see me again.
But I think it's meant to be weird enough just to pique your interest, to make you remember.
Yeah.
But
well, I mean, again, like it directly was led on in my life to, you know, getting a job where I was in an environment where I could. I picked up David Icke books for the first time. I mean, I've drifted away from what he says more recently, but he was for many of us, he was very instrumental in you know, breaking wide open what my sense of the possible was back then, you know, amongst others. And that was all because of that job in that bookshop in the Mind, Body and Spirit section. It's a funny year, 1997, because it was also the year that Men in Black, the film, came out. It was the year Princess Diana died. It was the year the first Harry Potter book came out. I remember I was actually working in a bookshop when that first Harry Potter book came out, and I remember exactly what I was thinking. I picked it and I thought, what a boring name for a protagonist. That was my first thought. I just thought, what a boring name. This is never going to work. Really? Harry Potter. That just sounds super. I'm asleep even reading his name. You know, it just shows what I know.
you didn't read it then, did you not?
No, I did eventually, but only after it had become a massive success. I probably read it about 5 years later or something.
Yeah,
but I distinctly remember there being my first memory. Like, there's no way. Why on earth would you call your main character Harry Potter?
I actually thought this. I didn't hear of Harry Potter because I grew up I was very poor in a Kansas state, and I wasn't very cultured even for Harry Potter. I was listening to Happy Hardcore.
You were just down the road. You could easily have come into that bookshop in Bradford where I was working. You never know. You might have, or maybe you didn't like bookshops. Who knows?
Well, I loved books actually. I used to read my grandma's books, but I remember being like 10 and reading Mary Higgins Clark. I don't know if you've ever read any Mary Higgins.
No, I've just about heard the name, but I couldn't honestly tell you what it. You know what?
She loves a good murder. So
obviously, I'm not. That's not my thing, really. I'm more of a sci-fi fantasy sort of a guy. Yeah.
Well, I would read anything. So I used to get stuff from one grandma, which she was. So one of my grandmas was a raging witch, really. She did tarot cards for like all of the town and all the rest of it. So I used to read her books, and it used to be like tea shop mysteries, where there'd be like some psychic detective going out and doing whatever, or there'd be like a book on Wicca or whatever. And then my other grandma, who was like a stout Catholic, could be sending me books like Anne of the Green Gables or whatever. So it was a bit interesting. But yeah, I had a really good... I'm sorry, my dog. Betty!
I was into those adventure game books as a kid, you know, before before computer games got a lot better, where you just like choose your own adventure and you turn to a certain page and you roll the dice. I was well into those.
Oh yeah, they sound elf. To be honest,
they had elves and things in them. Yeah, they were. A lot of them are based on Tolkien's lore, you know, especially the fighting fantasy ones, which I used to collect as a kid.
I mean, that's the thing. So I was kind of brought up on those, but then my sister was really into Terry Pratchett. So I loved Terry Pratchett though. It was so witty, wasn't he? He was like the most intelligent.
Yeah, but in that same kind of humour vein, I was more of a Douglas Adams fan myself, but Terry Pratchett was good too.
I didn't read Douglas Adams until I was much older. I think I was about 15 when I read Douglas Adams for the first time.
I honestly, I was such a Douglas Adams geek that I actually, when I was 13, I was able to literally quote the TV. So they did a TV series in 6 parts, and that's 3 hours of TV. I was able to literally quote that from start to finish.
That's amazing. That is amazing. I mean, he was absolutely before his time, though, wasn't it? I mean, you look at all these, and you just think, where have you got these ideas from? That's the big thing. You talk about this imagination workshop. I really think we're all divinely inspired, but there's people that are just open conduits, and I really just think, wow. I read the material and I read where they take stuff, and I just think I'd have never come up with that in a million years.
Yeah, well, but this is it. It's like, it's not about. I don't consider myself to. I consider myself to have a good imagination. Don't get me wrong, but I'm well aware of the fact that if I'm working with anyone, they could have a like their imagination could go to depths which I couldn't even dream of in certain areas. And it's just about coaxing it out of them, isn't it? You don't know. You say if you can sail out to sea with the express purpose of measuring how deep the sea is, and you can drop it and you can come back and say, oh, the sea is 600 feet deep, or you could go in the other direction and come back and say it's 6,000 feet deep. You just don't know what you just don't know what you're going to get. Everyone's mapping their. That's another. It's one of my little things on Twitter, isn't it? Everyone's exploring their own little corner of infinity, and everyone has infinite depth. It's just a case of finding where that bit is, where only you are, and no one else can go.
Yeah, it's very subjective, isn't it? Like you said. And we've all got our own kind of niches, haven't we? That we can all, like you said, go deep and deep and deep and deep. And there could be another person that would do something else in a different area that we can't even scratch the surface there, what they've done. Yeah. So I absolutely agree. But yeah, I just think, if you were to give advice to somebody, a younger person perhaps, or anybody really, because we can all do this at whatever age, to get into writing and to get into kind of exploring themselves, I mean, what advice would you give out?
I don't know if I would give advice. I mean, if someone were to ask me for advice,
if somebody's like, Al, what am I going to do? I really want to get into writing, or I really want to be more creative, or whatever. Like, what would you say to them?
I would say, don't make the mistake that I did for so long, and constantly worry about writing to please an audience which you're imagining in your mind. You imagine this audience like it's some sort of faceless mob, and you're just imagining what they want to hear. No, you've got to write about what you would love to read. And I think that's the only way you can write anything good. But I mean, my weakness is I really struggle to finish anything, because I always get bored of an idea and interested in another idea, before I've finished the last one, So apart from Quinn's Abduction, which was my little online novella, which I published about 10 years ago, and that's another thing. I had a pentalogy planned. I certainly had the sequel all planned, and I wrote a third of the sequel, and I still fully intend to finish it someday, hopefully not too far in the future. But 10 years have passed, and I'm still only written a third of the sequel. Because in the meantime, I've been writing loads of other stuff as well. In the meantime, it's not like I haven't written at all. It's just I get my enthusiasm transports itself to a completely different idea, and that's a terrible weakness.
But that's inspiration, though, isn't it? You're striking while the iron's hot.
Yeah, it is, but this is the focus. You see, I mean, I honestly think this is one reason why I'm very short-sighted. It's like my soul gave me that short-sightedness as a message, which I then promptly didn't heed, which is your soul has a problem focusing. And this is to remind you.
You know what, though? Is it a problem, or can you flip it on its head?
It
and
probably
say that
actually, I think it has its advantage. That's a really good point, actually, because it has its advantages. It's a little bit like, you know, when people always go on about IQ as well, don't they, as a measure of intelligence. And IQ to me is like one of these laser pens. It can penetrate maybe 1,000 yards into the distance, you know, but the area that it will illuminate is about half an inch, isn't it? You know. So what use is that? It's not going to stop you from falling off a cliff in the dark, is it? Whereas if you've got a flashlight, it can only penetrate 20 yards into the distance, but it's going to save your life. You'll be able to see like a cliff coming. So what's really the more desirable trait? I guess it depends what you're trying to do. But it's the same with things like focus, isn't it? You know, focus can help you to achieve things that are really difficult to achieve. And I only know that because of my lack of it. You know, I honestly think I wouldn't be struggling for, to get enough work and things like that at this stage in my life if I had this ability to focus. On the other hand, I might never have actually had quite the vista of possibility or being able to perceive that, you know, while the world is apparently going to shit, there's actually reason to suppose there's plenty of good things happening that are a little bit off stage. You know, so that's not readily apparent to people with, you know, milliard gargantua brains who can penetrate a tiny area of darkness very, very far into the dark, and they can illuminate you know, it's very sort of, they dedicate their entire lives to proving a very minor point in academia, perhaps, you know. And, you know, we're all part of the jigsaw. I'm not knocking it, but you're quite right that there are advantages to not being like that as well.
I've got a few things to say to you about that. So the first one with focus. Focus is a skill, and it's because I've got I've got ADHD. So it's my nemesis, in all honesty. I'm like, oh, I'm going to pen I'm going to pen the next great novel. Oh, look, a butterfly. Oh, let's go into the garden. I get it. I really get it. But there are things you can do, and it depends how determined you are. And the second thing I want to say is we've all got skills, and I think we have ideas of what we should do. And actually, what we can actually look at is like, you know, I'm good at doing this. How can I employ that in the best way possible? So you're a very creative chap. You're very good at short stories. You're very good at making a point. And I think it's tailoring your skills in an avenue which is going to serve you the best, you know, in the best way, rather than looking at, you know, it goes back to this audience thing. You've got this imaginary audience going, oh, Al, you need to write the next best novel, you know. And sometimes we just need to write one novel and start writing another to realise, actually, we don't really want to do that quite yet. It's not the right time for that. But it was a great experience, and all these other things have shaped me. But what can I do now?
Yeah, I could just do with another 500 years to actually write all the ideas, you know, out properly. You know,
I agree. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Read all the books, or know all the knowledge. You know,
I wouldn't get bored. If they cured old age tomorrow, I'm not one of these people who'd get bored.
Oh God, no!
I don't get bored.
I don't either. I agree. How can you get bored?
Get bored. They've got bloody pudding between them. That's what I think, anyway.
There's a proper northern expression. Ah, you great pudding.
That is proper northern. I'll give you that. Yeah, proper northern. I used to be able to do a Barnsley accent, but I can't anymore. So I'm not. Yeah, trifle with your intelligence by even trying, because this is a serious podcast and not a comedy.
That's as good as an excuse for ending us.
It's a big lie, yeah. So yeah, is there anything else you want to ask, Kirsten?
You know, I can't think of anything at the moment. I'm just, you know, I just love this conversation, though. I've
really enjoyed it. It's just flown by, hasn't it?
Yes, it really has. And yeah, so tell us about your imagination workshops. Where can we find you? I'm going to put it in the description as well.
Well, the website is www.imagician.org. There's some more details on there. The option is, I mean, the idea is also to try and, because I think the people who need it most are big soulless corporations. So you know, the idea is to pitch it to them, but I don't really know how successful that'll be. But you've got to give these things a go. And I think, you know, if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. So.
That's a great idea, though. That really is a great idea.
But anyway, in the meantime, yeah, there's the option of. Yeah, but you've got to convince them. You've got to convince them in terms that they understand, which are probably to do with the you know, like the bottom line, which is, you know,
this can make
profit.
your employees more productive, so they'll do more work for you while they're.
Just give them some corporate bullshit. They'll lap it up, won't they?
It is true. I've got so when I did my sound therapy course, there's a chap that I studied called Craig, and he used to do corporate days. And he said, if you're ever trying to sell your service to somebody like that, what you need to do is give them some actual like evidence. So you use like case studies, or you say, oh, this is pretty, like, it's not like going, oh, it's sound therapy, man, and you're going to go on a massive journey and it's going to be great. It's like, oh no, we're using employment, and what it actually does is it's proven, because these studies that show that you know, when you have a gong bath or whatever, it puts you into this altered state and it relaxes you and it makes you more productive and all the rest of it. So you could go along those lines, you know.
Yeah, well, there's the whole angle. I just say, well, look, you know, I'm very comfortable sort of teaching in a business, and I've taught English for 20 years in you know, to foreigners and non-English speakers, I should say. And so there's that side of things, you know, so the whole presentation side. But there's also, you know, you can find information. AI is quite good at singling out information and arguments like this. It pointed out to me, it's like, did you know that you know, that within the EU, for example, 70% of corporations have identified a massive creativity problem, and you know, so you could kind of try and zero in on that sort of thing. Yeah, that
is definitely the angle that you need to go down. Absolutely.
Yeah,
you're more productive when they, you know, your imagination's being tickled.
And it's not only that, they get a certain budget, don't they, for these kind of training courses, and they have to just, you know, if they don't use that budget, they'll get a smaller budget the following year. So
they do use them, and it's the same sort. It's like they use them for like team building exercises as well. You know,
exactly. You know, so not only, all right, so not only does it like sort of, you know, tickle the imagination muscles, but it actually it can be a fun day out as well with your work colleagues. You know, obviously, I mean, there's I you know, like I do the one-to-one sort of Zoom kind of 90-minute ones as well, which is, but the thing is, that's harder to do because the sort of people who are inclined to try that are individuals who often are struggling like me, you know, to actually be able to afford. This would be a luxury to them. So, you know, I understand that it's a bit slow getting off the ground, and some things they just need a little bit of time to germinate. You know, sometimes it's not the right environment for an idea to germinate until the conditions change. So, you know,
I'd love to see
it's there anyway. Yeah. It's there. So, for anyone who wants to give it a go, you'd be more than welcome to. Just drop us an email or a DM on Twitter.
All right. Well, we are so grateful that you joined us, Al, and we would love for you to join us again. So
I'd love to. Yeah, that's really. You know, it keeps me going sometimes. The positive feedback I get from yourselves and others, like, you know, like Gary and Casper on the Quantum Bridge and others as well. You know, it really has kept me going at times when, you know, I've thought, oh God, it's just like sort of shouting into a bottomless pit, isn't it? You know, no one's listening. No, so it's reaching
people.
It means a lot to me that you appreciate what I do, and I certainly appreciate what you do as well. And so,
thank you.
Well done for starting this, and thank you for inviting me.
And thank you for coming. This has been
We've loved it.
We will leave Al's information in the description. And
thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for joining us. And Sam, I'm going to let you say it. Catch you on the...
Yeah. So catch you on the flip side, and we'll see you next week.
Love you. We love you guys. And if you want to stick around for a minute, Al, after the
Sure,
recording. All right, here we go.